Hi, everyone. Going to give just a few more minutes for everybody to get logged in and connected, and we'll start in just 1 or 2 minutes. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Link Center for this shared learning group focused on supports for trauma. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping items while we get started today. We do have live captioning and ASL interpreters present today. This session will be recorded, and the recording and the transcript will be shared with all attendees. The PowerPoint and documents that we review today will also be shared with everyone via email. We welcome you to revisit the content yourself and share it with your colleagues. Attendees cannot see the names of other attendees, and all attendees are muted. Please use the chat function in Zoom to communicate with other attendees and hosts in the webinar. You can use the chat by clicking on chat at the bottom of your screen. Please do be aware that your name will appear in the chat if you make a comment. And if you want to change your display name, you can do that by clicking on the 3 little dots next to your name and selecting rename. We will have representatives from the Link Center watching the chat and responding throughout the session today. If you'd like to submit a question or a comment privately to the host and panelists, you can do that by clicking on the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Following this webinar, you will receive an email with the material we review today, the recording and a transcript, as well as an evaluation that we ask you to please complete in response to today's shared learning group. At this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to Dr. Stacy Nonamaker, who's going to start today's presentation. Stacy, it's all yours.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. This is our second round of shared learning groups that we are hosting through the Link Center. Link Center is a grant funded by the Administration for Community Living. I'll talk more about that in a moment, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Stacy Nonamaker, and I am with the National Association of State Directors of Developmental Disability Services, NASDS. And just by way of a visual description, I'm sitting in front of a white Zoom background. I'm a middle-aged woman wearing glasses, brown hair, a little bit below my shoulders, straight. Today I'm wearing a white turtleneck with black stripes and a black sweater. So again, thank you, and we're so excited to have you all here with us today. This is our second meeting of the day. Just a few hours ago, we hosted a meeting for direct support professionals, and we're really excited to talk with you all about supports for trauma. While we only have an hour and a half together, we won't be able to do a deep dive, but we're just going to start the conversation about how to get tools, information, and resources related to trauma. And we know that this may be triggering for some. So take care of yourself. Please let us know in the chat if there's anything we can do to change the words that we use as we're meeting today. We even know that the word trigger may be triggering for some. So we invite you to share and react in the chat. And we welcome and we're open to all sorts of participation during the meeting. So some of you may just desire to listen and witness. Others may want to be actively engaged. So as my 18-year-old says, you do you, and we welcome all of that in this community. So the shared learning groups, for those of you who haven't joined us before, we are doing 4 meetings quarterly, one for direct support professionals, one for clinical professionals, one for people with lived experience, and one for families of people with lived experience. The information and the content that we'll present in the meetings is the same. The topic's the same, but we have changed some of the discussion questions and tailored some of the information for the specific audiences. The content that we've developed for the presentation is a collaboration among the Link Center partners. This includes people with lived experience, researchers, and people who work on policy issues. And as Stephanie said, bears repeating because we always have people asking. We are recording today's meeting. We'll have a transcription of the meeting, and we'll share the recording, the transcription, and the materials with you after the meeting. And we encourage you to share that far and wide with your colleagues, families, individuals that you support. So now I have the honor of turning the mic over to Perry Spencer, a mentally ill, autistic self-advocate, AAC user, and a member of the Link Center Steering Committee. They are a graduate of Tabor College Project Search, a program focused on teaching valuable employment skills to people with intellectual developmental disabilities and other disabilities. Perry worked as a direct support professional, and they are currently searching for a new work opportunity that would even further enhance their skill set and allow them to grow as an advocate. So Perry, let me turn it over to you. It's so great to have you here.
I'm a white person. I'm a white person with short light brown hair. I'm wearing a greenish gray coat. My pronouns are he, him. We are going to talk about trauma. Trauma is when bad things happen to us or we see bad things happening to someone else. We may feel scared, hurt, or upset when bad things happen to us. This is okay. We may also feel scared, hurt, or upset when we are reminded of bad things happening. This is also okay. Discussions of trauma are difficult, and it is okay if you need to take a break. I want to talk about the inherent trauma that can come from having an intellectual or developmental disability, or IDD and for short, and mental illness. Existing as someone with an IDD and mental illness comes with trauma that is not often talked about. Some people don't know that these experiences are traumatic. Ahead, there will be talk of unmet needs and discrimination towards people with IDD and mental illness. Be gentle with yourself. The first thing that is traumatic is not being able to say what you want or need. This happens most to people who are non-speaking, but can affect everyone with IDD and mental illness. It is very difficult and leads to not getting your needs met, frustration, and meltdowns. Another thing that is traumatic is a lack of choices and autonomy, which is the freedom to make choices about your own life. It is very scary to not have control over basic things like what you want to eat for dinner and major things like where you want to live. It makes a person feel very out of control and scared. Everyone should be able to make decisions about their life, including people with IDD and mental illness. Something else that is traumatic is not getting your support needs met. For example, Jackson lives on his own and needs help to use the stove, but his support worker only comes some days. He may want to use the stove on days where his worker isn't there, but can't do that safely because his need to have help while using the stove is not being met at all times. Having unmet support needs limits the choices of people with IDD and mental illness. Jackson may not have the choice of whether to cook dinner using the stove or the microwave when his worker is not present. It is also traumatic when people assume you are incapable or cannot do things without talking to you, especially when it is people who are supposed to be supporting you. People may think that you can't do anything for yourself, or because you can't use speech, you can't understand or say anything. This is not true, and it is not okay for people to think that. People should ask what you need help with instead of thinking you can't do certain things. The last traumatic thing is ableism. Ableism is when someone discriminates against you or treats you unfairly because you are disabled. There are little ways people will treat you unfairly. For example, someone may talk to your worker instead of you when you go out. Even though it isn't okay, some people may not know unless you tell them. There are also things that even non-disabled people know are not okay. and like a boss not giving someone a job because they are disabled. Ableism is found in all parts of life because the people who make laws have bad feelings about disabled people. Next, I want to talk about abuse and keeping people safe from abuse. It is a scary thing to think about, and it's okay if you need to step out, especially if you are an abuse survivor. However, it is important that we talk about abuse and how to keep people with IDD and mental illness safe. If we don't talk about it, we can't change it. It is important to know that people with IDD and mental illness are at a much higher risk of abuse than people without IDD. There are a few reasons why I think that is. Firstly, people with IDD and mental illness may not know what abuse looks like. For example, someone may not know that someone taking their money or controlling their money without giving them choices of how to spend it is abuse. It is important to teach people with IDD and mental illness about what abuse can look like so they know when abuse is happening and how to report it. Another problem is that even if a person with IDD and mental illness does know that they are being abused, they might not have the tools to report abuse. This is especially true for people who are not speaking. Communication devices with symbols do not have the correct names for genitals. This may not seem like a big deal, but it means that someone who uses a device can't report sexual abuse. A person with IDD and mental illness also may not know who to report the abuse to, or how to say what happened in a way others will understand. People with IDD and mental illness are often denied sex education. This makes reporting abuse more difficult. Someone might not even know that sexual abuse is happening without information about sex that the person can understand. People with IDD and mental illness need and deserve correct information about abuse and help from supporters to stay safe. Some people with IDD and mental illness may have a hard time staying safe even with correct information and support because of their disability. Supporters should be looking out for changes in a person that may be signs that abuse has occurred. However, it is not a replacement for teaching people about abuse and how to report it. It is important to remember that abuse is never the victim's fault. It doesn't matter what they did or didn't do. Believe people when they tell you about abuse. That is most important. The difference between crisis and trauma. When a tree stands against the storm, it's during the resistance to the storm that the tree is in crisis. After the storm, bent and soaked in rain, branches snapped and completely torn away. Now the tree knows trauma. If I compare myself to the tree, I know my strength is in my roots. Monica Wofford, survivor. Sharing lived experience. This meeting will be talking about ways people deal with trauma and strategies people use to address trauma. Take care of yourself and allow silence to be a safe space and feel empowered to do what's necessary for your comfort and care. We celebrate our individuality, our diverse culture, and our singularity while we celebrate the discoveries realized in our collective humanity. We know that we are each unique with our own experiences in the world. We empathize with experienced traumas that hinder our resilience. Some people have experienced trauma that makes it hard to recover and move forward. We listen with open minds and compassion, without judgment or blame.
Perry, thanks so much for setting the stage and grounding us in our topic for today. Incredibly powerful. Appreciate doing this work with you. So today's agenda, if you want to take a second and introduce yourself in the chat, that would be great. You can put your name in there, any group, association, affiliations that you want to include. That's great. We want to know who's here and who joined us. We'll start off by talking about what the Link Center is, and then we'll get into the meat of our work together today and talk about supports for trauma. there's many resources that are out there, primarily in the mental health field, or mostly in the mental health field. And what we're really learning as we're thinking about the Link Center and this topic is that there are universal practices to trauma-informed approaches that are not necessarily diagnostic specific. So even though we're talking about individuals with co-occurring needs, and there's a lack of resources related to trauma and people with co-occurring conditions, we do know that there are some things that today we're going to share with you, and also that we can elevate, right? And also we know that there's some work that we need to be doing to fill that void or gap. And again, in the meantime, while we're doing that with our partners at the Link Center, we're going to share some things today, expose you to some things that are already out there, and some things that folks like Perry and some of our other partners have developed for you all to use in your practice and in your day-to-day. Then we'll also spend some time doing a group exercise, sharing a hopefully relevant case or situation where we can talk about challenges, but mostly solutions to supporting people who have experienced trauma. So this is the first of many prompts to ask you all, as we're walking through the content today, we have an open invitation. Use the chat to share any of your go-to resources, trainings, website, information that you have when you think about supporting someone who has experienced trauma. Again, part of the Link Center is really for us to identify what's out there and elevate things that are relevant to people with co-occurring conditions like IDD, brain injury, and mental health conditions. And we're using you all in this shared learning experience to really share what you may have within your toolbox, within your arsenal of resources and information. So I'm just going to take a moment to talk about the Link Center for those of you who haven't heard about the Link Center. Again, I said this at the outset that this is a grant that's funded through the Administration for Community Living. It's a 5-year grant. We're about 1.5 years into the grant, and it's really exciting work. It's a place where we get to dig in and think about how can we better support people with co-occurring conditions. And we can't do that work without many partners working with us to do things like develop these shared learning groups and some of the other activities that I'll talk about in just a moment. So the leading partners of the grant is NASES, the organization that I'm affiliated with, NAD, the National Association for Dual Diagnosis, and NASHBD, the National Association for State Mental Health Program Directors. And you'll hear from some of our colleagues from NASHBD today. And then we also, people are multidimensional, and we also are putting a keen eye on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the work that we're doing through the Link Center, and have some really amazing partner organizations who are helping us do that. And you'll hear from some colleagues from Green Mountain Self-Advocates today. We have Autistic Self-Advocacy Network as a partner, the National Association of State Head Injury Administrators, and Communication First. And then finally, we're really wanting to be sure that we have our checks in place that is telling us that we're meeting the needs of the communities that we're seeking to impact, and also doing what we said we were going to do as part of the grant. So we have some partners who are helping to that end as well. And that's the National Center for START Services, Sonoran Center of Excellence, and the Ohio State University Nisander Center. So we're very fortunate to have a lot of really amazing partners who have also been thinking about how do we better support individuals with co-occurring conditions. So there's 3 main goals of the Link Center. The first is really around systems change. And when we talk about supporting individuals with co-occurring conditions like intellectual developmental disabilities, brain injury, other communication differences, as well as co-occurring mental health conditions, medical conditions. We know that that requires, and you all know this as clinicians very well, that requires coordination, relationships across systems to get people what they need. But oftentimes, and again, in my experience, and I'm sure yours as well, that system poses a barrier to getting people what they need. So we're really seeking through the Link Center work to work with federal partners and others to improve policies, service design, and service coordination for people who have co-occurring conditions. We're also looking to build capacity of direct support professionals as well as clinical practitioners, so that people can, supporters can support people in a more holistic way, instead of, what we tend to do right now in our field is we have people out there that are great mental health practitioners. We have people out there who are very experienced and expertise in supporting people from more of a habilitative or developmental disability lens. But what we're really looking to do is build a diverse workforce to support people with co-occurring conditions. And we're thinking that if we make some systems change and we build this capacity, this is only going to increase service access for people. So improving access to get people the services and supports they need in the systems that are able to provide it. And doing that in a very person-centered, culturally and linguistic appropriate way. So ambitious goals, but we have many activities as part of the Link Center that we are engaging in, again, with a keen lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, and around that quality improvement. So Stephanie also mentioned it, bears repeating, that at the end of the session today, you will receive an email from Zoom with the evaluation to let us know what you thought about your experience during the meeting today. We'll also have a QR code at the end in the slide deck that you can access the evaluation that way as well. But it's just one example of how we're continuously looking for feedback on the work that we're doing. And we're also engaging and leaning into the expertise of lived experience. So Perry has been introduced and is one of our 12 steering committee members who really has been integral in helping us guide the work, making sure what we're doing is relevant, making sure what we're doing is timely. Could not have built this content without Perry and others really contributing and putting in that lived experience perspective. And then we'll have these quarterly shared learning groups ongoing. We have some coming up. We'll talk about that at the end as well. But really, shared learning groups as a way for us not just to talk about what the Link Center has been unearthing by way of resources, information, and training, but to capitalize on that shared part of the shared learning groups, which is to pull from you all, from your expertise, from your day-to-day experience, what should we be focusing on? What are the things we can elevate? And what are the things that we can take for action with the Link Center? And ongoing, we're constantly engaging with other people who are experts in this field, who have been thinking about how to better support people with co-occurring conditions, to really also inform this work that we're doing. And then finally, I'll just mention that we have really been taking a hard look at what's out there in terms of resources, information related to supporting people with co-occurring conditions. Also, bringing to the forefront and highlighting those resources, information, training that's out there that mental health practitioners could benefit from to learn more about individuals with IDD or brain injury, and vice versa. So we're doing all of this resource development and dissemination. And it's culminating in having this website or a resource hub, if you will, that fingers crossed will have that up and available to the public soon, not just yet, but really looking to create this national repository of resources and information for you all. And I'll just take a moment, because we have a captive audience, to launch a poll and give it just a couple minutes here that we're interested, as we develop these resources and materials and share information. We're really curious generally how people like to get their information. And we know this could look different for different people, very individualized, different groups of people. So again, we're just capitalizing on the opportunity because we have you all here today. So I'll just give it a minute. And for those of you that are choosing other, I'd really like to hear what that is. If you feel willing to share that in the chat, that would be great. Great. Looks like we're slowing down. Thank you so much. We appreciate that, and it's very informative to our work moving forward. Okay. So the goals for today is we're going to share what we're doing at the Link Center related to supports for trauma, what we've sort of been identifying as some things we want to expose you all to by way of resources and information. And then we want to provide the opportunity to get your input related to supports for trauma. I mentioned this before, we'll have a group exercise at the end, and that's going to be one way we'll do that. And again, please, throughout our time together today, identify any needed resources or information that the Link Center could really be thinking about and putting some effort in researching and disseminating where that is available. So now I get to turn it over to one of our partners and colleagues from the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors, and I'm turning it over to Dr. Brian Sims. Thanks so much, Brian.
And thank you, Stacy, and good day to everyone. Such a pleasure to be part of this, and I'm thrilled to be able to provide this particular segment. I'm Dr. Brian Sims. I am a psychiatrist. I'm the senior medical advisor with the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am an older Black male with glasses, gray black hair, a gray shirt, and my background is white. I'm thrilled to be a part of this discussion today because my background really centers around trauma-informed care. I've been in the business of working in the field of psychiatry for roughly about 30 years. In that time frame, I've spent a lot of time working with a very notable group of individuals headed by Dr. Joan Gillese with the National Center for Trauma-Informed Care. So we've had the opportunity to move from center to center and spot to spot, and really enforcing the utilization of trauma-informed practices in the things that we do. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit today about why we're really talking about supports for trauma in this realm. One of the things that we do know already is the universality of trauma. Trauma is pervasive. It is in every single facet of treatment that we all see. These are things we already know. So as we move forward, we're going to kind of take a look at it from the lens of general population and then kind of hone it down just a little bit more. I first of all want to give credit to Perry because I think the explanation there and his timeliness with regards to providing that information gives the groundwork and gives the validity to the topic of even talking about trauma-informed care. So we want to thank him definitively for that. We also want to remind you again about any of this language that potentially could be triggering or cause discomfort. Please avail yourself and take care of yourself. So next slide, please. So, and we look at trauma in general, and I'm talking about general population or public. We know already it's pervasive. There's a lot of things that everyone has heard of trauma-informed care. Everyone knows that trauma is extremely pervasive. What we do know is that it can permeate anywhere. It can get to individuals of all ages, of all genders, races, ethnicities, sexual orientation. It can pervade every single aspect of what we look at. So when we're taking a look at our treatment strategies, one of the greatest strategies that is really fortifying for us is the knowledge that if we consider the people we work with as having a history of trauma, it's very likely that you're going to be correct about 90% of the time. Now, in that, we need to kind of go backwards just a tad to take a look at the definition of trauma, because it sets the stage. And this definition that I'm about to quote really comes from the work of SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Hygiene Services Administration, that years ago began to take a look at trauma as an issue of implementing something that could help at that time to reduce or eliminate seclusion and restraints that were occurring in various of our facilities. What happened was they actually convened a number of individuals, persons with lived experience, clinical professionals, got the whole group together, and they came up with a universal definition of trauma. And in it, what you see is the first word is individual. And that's the thing that we all learn about trauma, is that one person's trauma is not another person's trauma at all. Individual trauma, and individual trauma results from an event or possibly a series of events or a set of circumstances that is experienced by the individual as physically or emotionally harmful. I want to pause there, because what it's really saying is that one person's experience may be different than another. There may be one who has a very same experience as the next person, but takes it in a very different way. What may be otherwise traumatic for a person may not be traumatic for another individual. The other portion of that definition is about it being harmful and having long-lasting adverse effects. And it affects that individual's functioning and mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. I put the spiritual not at last because I will put it at last, but it's to also acknowledge that in all of our dealings with the people that we serve, we need to have a understanding of the importance of spirituality within this whole realm of our treatment strategies. Next slide, please. When we take a look at the general population, if we go with women, we know that women are 2 times more likely to develop post-traumatic stress than men. When you look at the other population, also in general, women report higher rates of sexual assault or child sex abuse. When we look at men, men are more likely to experience accidents, physical assaults, combat, disasters, or be a witness to death or injury. So we're looking at it from a generalized standpoint of view, men, women. Now, if we go to the next slide, what we'll do is kind of tease it down and take a look at our BIPOC population, Black, Indigenous people of color. Blacks are more likely to experience PTSD in their lifetime. If we take a look at minority youth, not just Black youth, but all in general, minority youth are more likely to experience trauma, including what we will really drill down on is the historical trauma. Taking a look at the past, the immigration stressors, the natural and man-made disasters, the discrimination, the violence. Minority youths, we know, are less likely to access medical and mental health care. So these are all things that we already know and we're already working with in terms of looking at the general population. Next slide, please. If we take a look at the Black and Latino young men, then what we see is that they experience violence, poverty, incarceration. They have a lack of access to health care, as we mentioned earlier, the marginalization and the low social status. And it's at a much higher degree than the general population. If we take a look at the historic and intergenerational trauma, and this is trauma that's passed down from older to younger, we see a huge issue involving historical trauma. So it's one of those things that we really want to put our focus into when we are working with individuals, not just individuals of color or otherwise, but looking at all histories. We want to look at our indigenous population, the American Indians, the Alaskan Natives, because they experience increases their risk of actually experiencing trauma right now. And these are things that many of us being treatment individuals don't have the skill set when we go into these populations, but we need to learn. If we take a look at LGBTQI plus individuals, they are nearly 4 times more likely to experience violent assault than the cisgender heterosexual counterparts. And these are, again, it's information that we know already, but what it does do is it broadens our understanding that trauma does not select populations, does not select individuals, and all trauma is very pervasive. Next slide. So let's take a look at what happens when we are looking at those with disabilities. Because those with disabilities, we know, are 3 to 4 times more likely than people without disability to experience adverse effects such as abuse, as neglect, and medical trauma. We also know that within that population, the adults of that population, 85 to 90% of them who get mental health support will have a history of trauma. So it's making our, I suppose, if we want to look at what our methodology is going to be, it makes it fairly simple that if we are meeting an individual with ID, we can pretty much assume that trauma is a significant portion of that individual's life. So we want to make sure that what we're doing is putting our services with a focus on what we can do to assist in the population. Next slide, please. Now, the one assumption that we do not want to make is that these individuals cannot be helped. Sometimes we have the age-old perspective that those with disabilities will have disabilities, that they cannot learn, that they cannot heal, that they cannot find recovery. If that is true, then we are not looking at trauma-informed care in a proper fashion. Because what we do know is that proper trauma-informed techniques and strategies do help with healing. So one of the questions that we ask all groups, we can ask the clinical service providers, we can talk to the direct service providers, we can look at all of our groups and ask this simple base question: do we believe in the people we serve? Because if we believe in the people we serve, then we know that whatever strategies or techniques we're going to put into place are going to help those individuals to strive to move them towards healing. That recovery is indeed possible. And this provides the mantra for which SAMHSA really operated with when they developed a guidance for trauma-informed practices. Now, this particular guidance was developed over 10 years ago with a coalition of individuals of all walks of life who came in and talked about how to make this trauma-informed perspectives more active and more relevant towards the people that we serve. And in that guidance package, which is public domain, it's easy to acquire, you can read through the entire package, you will see what are called 6 key principles of a trauma-informed approach. Now, in those 6 principles, I'll just briefly kind of run through those particular principles. We're looking at how we as providers can be able to give a trauma-informed interaction and treatment strategies with the people we serve. The first one, next slide, that we want to work with is safety. And safety is so huge when you are comparing it to the other factors that we are listing in the principles. Because the one thing that is very certain is that if a person doesn't feel safe, then healing can't take place. But not only can healing not take place, but if they don't feel safe, there can be no trust. There can be no connection. So we put this one first with deliberateness to really look at what things can we do as clinical providers to enhance the safety for our individuals. Now, I do want to point out that each of these slides has at the bottom a person with lived experience that has a video. And I would really encourage you to take a look at those videos. They're very powerful, but they are very much helpful in giving that affiliation and that association and strengthening how, when we do operate with these 6 principles, how much of a difference it makes in how receptive individuals are. So when you meet someone in your line of work, how can you respect their need for safety? And one of the ways is look at the environment. Look at what's around you at the time. Is it appealing? Make sure it's not harsh. Make sure it's not driving away. You can give an example of sometimes we go to the emergency room in the good old days, and one of the things that you would see all around the emergency room were signs to say, these are the signs that you're having a heart attack. These are the signs that you have high blood pressure. These are the signs that you're diabetic. Well, you can come in the emergency room not knowing what your illness is. And after you read a few signs, people get worse because it actually is more of a triggering component for them. But you also want to help by providing information and giving them time to speak. And you'll hear that over and over again as we go through the different principles here, is that ability to express empathy is such a powerful tool to utilize. Next slide, please. Now let's take a look at trustworthiness and transparency. Again, reference the live experience video that is there, but it's about being open and honest with the goal of actually building trust. Because sometimes it's just difficult. We go in as clinicians expecting the person to divulge everything to us, not realizing that with many of them, it's an extremely difficult thing to do. So we need to be open and honest because our goal is to get them to connect. So how do we do that? One of the things is helping to establish trust. And that trust can come when you have clear expectations, when you have clear boundary settings, and that you are good with your word. So if you say you're going to meet with someone at a certain time, you are there. Because once they see the reliability, they see the care, they see the concern, that can really enhance the trust. And then providing information as it is known. Sometimes in our treatment strategy, we project what we think is the best thing for the person and say, you'll succeed if you just do it this way. When in actuality, we're not listening. And we need to open that door up in this trustworthiness and transparency. Next slide, please. Now we'll look at my favorite, which is really enhancement of peer support, because this helps to build mutual healing relationships, because they are then able to connect with those who they see as equals with them. This was a real big premise with veterans. And we saw a lot of this with veteran treatment, where veterans would only want to speak to other veterans because the feeling was that they could better understand what that person was experiencing more than a clinical professional who may not have a military background. So when we do that, keep in mind as a clinical professional, the value of the peer support. And if you don't have enough information, seek it out. Go and look at what the values can be with peer support. Speak to other clinicians who might be using peer support as to how to enhance it and utilize it in your own service. And then have those peer supports available directly through a series of contact lists or otherwise. Immensely can be extremely helpful, because even within that, as the person sees that you are bringing in individuals to assist them, that can do no more than enhance the trust that that individual has in you and their willingness to continue to share. Next slide, please. Let's move to, excuse me, to collaboration and mutuality. And this is about sharing power and decision-making. This is one of the tripping points sometimes for clinical professionals. I know it was for me when I first started out, not because I was dictating to individuals what I thought was the best treatment strategy for them. And I was not giving them a voice in a response. So we need to talk about the sharing of it, the partnering with individuals. So we know that we have informed consent and so forth. So we're going to discuss medications, risk and benefits, and how different people can respond to that is important for us to know. Because how they come to the decision to embrace what you're saying might be different from person to person. But provide information about the decisions and remind them again about the ownership piece of the decision, how you and they can work together. A lot of times it's really helpful to be able to say to a person, this is a strategy I think might be helpful, but in the same token, if it isn't, we'll move to another one. Give them hope, give them the understanding that this collaboration depends on a give and take relationship. Next slide. And as we go to now empowerment, voice, and choice. And this is now on our end as professionals to recognize their strengths and use them to help them to be more self-regulatory, to be more of a self-advocate, because as we've said before, and you've heard, I'm sure, a number of times, the great treatments that you offer, the wonderful strategies you put into place, you can't go home with that individual. So it's important that we offer them some degree of empowerment so that they're able to take those tools out and be able to address things as they approach them. So how do we do that as clinical professionals? How about putting up principles, putting out information that will help them? It might be signs, it might be brochures, it might be pictures, but it's a direct thing that's concrete that either they can see or hold on to or provide as a support for them. But then again, you also want to ask them, because remember, they're going out into their world, and that world is going to affect them in a certain way. And isn't it good to know how they would plan to respond to the type of world they're going to see when they go out there? Look at their abilities. Do things that help to give them pride. And the last slide, please. We go into cultural, historical, and gender issues. This is huge category, and as I've said before, that we could take up our entire time talking about these issues. But what's important is to try to move past our stereotypes, our biases, offer a gender responsive service using the healing power of cultural connection. It's important for us to be respectful of culture and to address historical trauma and gender identity. So in one sense, in that back and forth and that empowerment piece, have the person explain their history, have them talk about their culture, work with the family and other supporters to understand those cultural values, and then check yourself, check your own value system so that we make sure that we're avoiding any significant judgment that we need to have, right? And now at this time, I'll turn things over to Max Barrows from Green Mountain Self-Advocates, a partner in the Link Center. Thank you all.
And thank you, Brian Sims, for that. So I'm Max Barrows, and I just want to quickly introduce myself. I am a young Black man. There's a white background behind me. I am wearing a light blue dress collared shirt with a dark blue tie with red and white diagonal stripes, and I have short black hair. So I wanted to just point that out. And we will go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk about like a new tool that we developed on managing triggers. So next slide. And when I say, when we use the word triggers, we mean things that make you remember something bad that happened to you. The tool is written in plain language, this tool. So it is easy for most people to use. So this is the new tool that we use to manage triggers. So you may be wondering, what is this tool? It is a 2-page handout. It helps people to make a plan for what to do and say if they get upset when they remember something bad or are from the past, or, bad from the past. And triggers can be people, places, smells, sounds, tastes, or things. For example, if someone who hurt you smelled like smoke or perfume, those smells might make you remember what happened. Triggers can make you feel really scared or anxious. Our minds and bodies might explode with feelings. And when you remember bad things, you might feel sad, mad, or scared for a while. One purpose of this tool is for a person to try to figure out, how the things that trigger how to try to figure out how things that trigger them. When possible, a person can try to stay away from those things. But, for sure, you might not be able to avoid, all your triggers. And we found that knowing your triggers can help you understand why you got upset. So, just want to point that out. And next is like, how do you use this tool? The tool begins by asking a person to identify their triggers, and the question is, what are my triggers? So, this can be updated as a person gets better at figuring out what reminds them of bad things from the past. Next, a person can make a list of what they can do to be okay when they get upset. These are strategies to use to feel better. For example, taking like a long walk, sitting alone in a quiet space, listening to music, and talk to yourself, which is what I do. For me, it can be calming, to do what I call an energy release, which is when, whenever there's thoughts that come to mind, and just after an overwhelming day, like I use those thoughts to kind of, feel myself, feel my body, and, my body, allows me to release energy, any kind of energy that builds up from an overwhelming day. And it can, be seen as like, and some people who are autistic, hand flapping, jumping, body rocking, and the list goes on. And helpful support. This includes what others can do to help me be okay. For example, for me, I want people to help me stay calm by being calm themselves. Also for me, please do not ask me a lot of questions. And it helps to tell me I am safe. Not helpful support. In other words, what do others do that is not helpful? For example, please do not try to stop me from talking about the past. Do not ignore or judge my feelings. For me, I do not want someone to talk in a loud, demanding voice. Who should support me? Make a list of the people you want to support you when you are upset. It can be anyone. I personally want someone that I trust. Who should not support me? Do I not want to support me when I am upset? For me, people who do not understand me in that regard. When do you use this tool? You may be wondering when. Go over the completed tool on a regular basis. Support us to practice what we can do to be okay when we get upset, especially if there are new people in your life. Triggers can come up at any time, so have this tool handy whenever it is needed. If it helps, consider posting it in your room or somewhere or someplace where you can find it easily. How do you share it with others? When it comes to sharing with others, for me, I would share it with the people I spend time with. It is important to let the people you trust know what they can do to be supportive. I personally would want it to be a part of my person-centered plan. A copy of this can be kept, in your home or in your pocket or put on or on your cell phone. So those are things to keep in mind. Finally, I'm going to talk about checking in. checking in with others who support us. When it comes to checking in, it is not a time to give me a lot of instructions or to school me in what you think I should do. It is a time for listening. And here are some natural questions to ask to keep the conversation going while doing so neutral, I should say. How did that make you feel? What do you think? What's important to you? Do you need more information? What have you tried that works for you? What do you do that makes you feel okay? The goal is to create a welcoming space so we can say what is on our minds. Now, sometimes a person is seeking out your opinions. They want you to tell them what to do. It can be easy to tell me what to do, but it doesn't help. It does not help us. You need to help us figure out what we think and what we want to do by asking questions or giving us information in a neutral way. For example, if someone wants ideas about calming down, you could say, well, you need to focus on what works for you. But some people try walking, some people try music, some people try deep breathing. The goal is to stay neutral and keep your opinions to yourself. Checking in is helpful for the person and their supporters. We get others to listen to us. We get emotional support. Our supporters get information on how we are feeling. We tell our supporters what they can do and say to support us. Over time, we build trust. And that's the goal. So thanks for listening to me. And at this time, I will now turn it over to Wendy to co-lead with me through a group exercise, which I hope you find fun.
Thank you, Max. So I'm Wendy Morris. I'm a senior behavioral health advisor with NASHBID, the National Association for State Mental Health Program Directors. I am a middle-aged white woman. I have gray hair pulled back in a messy bun, a black turtleneck with a very colorful scarf, and purple glasses. And so as Max said, we want to now present the group exercise. It's going to just be a very brief case example with a question to follow. And we're just really looking for people to react to it. So you can do that by raising your hand. And Max and I, one of us will call on you. You can put it in the chat and we'll read those aloud. You're welcome to come off camera. You're welcome to, stay invisible, right, to the group if you choose. We just invite you to gauge however you're comfortable. So we have about 25 minutes, I think, to do this exercise. So lots of time for some good discussion. So with that, I'll turn it, if we go to the next slide, Max will read our study.
All right. I am a mental health practitioner. Alice was in my office recently. Alice is a 25-year-old woman with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. She was referred by her PCP or primary care physician because she had been experiencing high blood pressure, panic attacks, insomnia, nightmares, and depressive symptoms, including social isolation and loneliness. Alice said her job in the service industry is stressful and doesn't pay enough to afford rent and necessities. She also said looking for another job elsewhere would take her away from her parents and siblings with whom she lives with. Her grandparents immigrated to the United States 60 years ago, leaving a country that was not safe, seeking better opportunities for their families. Her family has constantly struggled with a new country and language, poverty, and food insecurity. When I asked her about her childhood, Alice said her parents loved her and pushed her hard to succeed, but she also said they often were angry and sullen. Her PCP, or primary care physician, noted she may be showing signs of PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. Do you agree? If so, how should treatment proceed? So again, do you agree, or if so, how should treatment proceed? You can answer by unmuting yourself or putting your answer in chat. If you're going to unmute yourself, just raise your hand or even just say it. I will make sure that I will get to your answers as much as I can, because I love learning from you all.
It's always a few moments of silence before the first volunteer gets the courage to speak, right, Max?
That means they're thinking.
Yes. Oh, there's a hand up.
Okay, yeah, I got Sabina Hussain. Sorry.
Thank you. That is Shabina Hussain. Thank you for this opportunity to share my thoughts on this case. I feel as if she is being pressured by the family, like she has PTSD because her parents have been pushing her a bit too much. And she feels they are often angry and sullen. So she should be made comfortable in the way she likes to be without judging her and making her feel more, safe in the environment to be what she like, to relax and be what she wants to be, and instead of pushing her too much in a certain way. And it comes from the parental trauma too, like they were immigrants and so they had to succeed with different languages and different environment, cultural. It's kind of a culture shock when immigrants come here. So they had to deal with that, and that was transmitted down the generation to their daughter. And it's difficult for her to cope with autism and stress.
Thank you. Oops.
I got Kirsten Mason next, and then I'll go to chat.
Hi. I think as a clinician, I would need more information as far as actual PTSD as a diagnosis, but generational trauma, I think, is important here to look at, and probably, taking some time with her to find out more about different areas of her life, and maybe even, if possible, do some family therapy as well.
So Max, I think you said we go to chat next.
Yeah,
I've
there's
got
chat.
two in here. So one says there's many layers of peer support opportunities. So I'd love to hear some more from everybody on that. And then the second one is I would recommend considering possible anxiety screening, which kind of goes along with the comment we just had, right? That we probably need to do a little bit more assessment. And then there's another one that says, starting with biological concerns to rule out the high blood pressure contributing to anxiety and panic attacks, which is such a great point, right? We don't want to assume which is the horse and which is the cart, what's causing what. So it's really good to look at the physical health as well.
Anybody else want to, anybody else have an answer for the story about on Allison?
It looks like we just got another chat. It says, I think there may be many diagnoses that are contributing to Alice's PTSD symptoms. Food insecurity as a child and her current experience of poverty alone supports a PTSD diagnosis.
And again, feel free to unmute yourself and, say your answer. And just like if you can, if able, raise your hand by the raise hand icon.
Because, and thank you for that, Max, too. I just want to remind everybody what Stacy said. Again, this is shared learning, so there's no right or wrong answers. This is not us trying to seek out what do folks know. It's, you know, we want to learn from you kind of what your thoughts are, and maybe there's things you'd like to know more about, or give us some guidance on things the Link Center can do to help support practitioners in dealing with these kinds of clinical cases.
I got a hand up, Carrie Low, go ahead.
It's actually Casey Wells, so I'm not sure. Carrie is a coworker of mine, so I must be logged under her link maybe. But anyway, I was just thinking, you know, we talk a lot about treating the symptoms and not the diagnosis, right? So although it's a good question, does she have PTSD, that kind of thing, what you can see people doing in the chat is kind of pulling apart some of those layers and trying to think of, okay, what are some ways we can support each of these things that she's feeling? Because it doesn't really matter, right, where it comes from. Of course it does, but you know what I'm saying. There's not a pill for PTSD, so nobody's looking to solve that one thing. They're trying to kind of pull back some of those biological, psychological, and social layers. So I think in each of those sections, so we, you know, I mentioned earlier, like the treating the high blood pressure, right? Like, is that contributing to the panic attack, maybe even some of her insomnia and nightmares? There are things she could do, I think, like group, you know, maybe there are some other immigrants or refugees in the area that they could, there's a therapy group or something where they could get together and share experiences or talk about, you know, things that make them, things that are triggers to them, right? Similar to what you were saying about veterans, right? Like where it's like, I want to only hear from a veteran if I'm having difficulties with my PTSD. I want a lived experience person to talk to me through that. So that peer support piece, but they might have to go a little bit deeper into where she lives to find that specific type of support that's there.
That's great. So Max, we have several more comments in the chat. So one says, this is from Maura. Yes, feeling all the pressures of life and interacting with her family on top of her history of a dangerous living situation, trauma seems likely. Family may be traumatized. Continue collaboration with PCP, develop trust and strategize with her. And yeah, such a good point, right? Trust is so important. Next is from Alicia. I think there is PTSD, poverty, and environmental trauma as well. I also do believe that additional screening is necessary. So that's been a kind of a trend for sure in the comments. Karen says, in addition to treating her medical needs and providing therapy, connect her with peer support group with people who have a background similar to Alice's, so she can learn from others from her culture. Next is Cody says, agree. There appears to be a growing body of evidence for accumulated trauma in many individuals with ASD, due in part to the prevalence of co-occurring conditions and how that affects a person's ability to process experiences. In that vein, it may be that it is PTSD or an alternative trauma diagnosis. Trauma responses are also becoming more common explanations for what may have traditionally been assumed to be a quote unquote behavior, which is helping with the tendency towards diagnostic overshadowing. That's a great point. Brian says, Regina, thank you so much for the detailed and very accurate definition. And I think that might, Brian, have been in response to an earlier comment where somebody gave a pretty comprehensive definition of historical trauma. And then Megan says, I would love to have a trusted person work through trauma tool that you shared with us. Then that tool being shared with all of the support people that she determines to know. And that kind of prompts one of the things we talked about as we were preparing for today's shared learning group. And that is, as clinicians, do you each individually feel like you have the experience, knowledge, and tools you need to work with somebody with historical trauma that is from a different culture and maybe is having experiences that you haven't? Do you think that's a factor in maybe trying to find another practitioner who may be able to assist you, or you're just with Alice, or do folks have thoughts on that?
And again, chat is also available. We're keeping track of chat, but also feel free to, raise your hand and unmute yourself and just say what it is that you think of. Go ahead, David Grady.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So I appreciate all these comments. I think they're spot on. I think we also need to remember the autism spectrum disorder and maybe consider a solution-focused approach with consideration of long-term goal of improving her job situation, which might be a more person-centered vocational discovery approach. In terms of the cultural, her cultural background, I would definitely get consultation or support from somebody who's familiar with that culture and the traumas experienced by that culture. But if we can help her adopt skills that can help her manage those panic attacks and then begin to focus on strategies that she can have her best life, might be helpful.
So I have another chat from Justin. It says, agree strongly with what has been shared so far. Poverty alone is the largest daily triggering event that contributes to all the listed symptoms. I think this would likely read as PTSD in many people that don't have an ASD diagnosis, but can be exacerbated in that regard. And then Perry, who you all heard from earlier, says it's important that we acknowledge her autism as well as her mental illness, because these compound upon each other in my experience. It is also important to know that because of the autism, if she does have PTSD or another mental illness, some things may work differently for her in her healing journey. Super important point, Perry. Regina said, I appreciate your point more about the family's trauma. The unit is sharing experiences and the stress of poverty, food insecurity, and linguistic needs on top of the historical trauma may be exacerbating Alice's current experiences. So that, I think, was another question we talked about, I believe, Max, was, how do we need to support the family, right? So I don't know if people want to respond to that, but that was a good comment.
Yeah, once again, you can unmute yourself, raise your hand on the raise hand icon. I will call on you. Go ahead, Shabina.
Thank you. I would for assisting the family, I would send in I would rely on a social worker who is culturally sensitive. Maybe if there is a different language they speak, so that person, there's a common language that they can share, and probably the social worker can reach out to the family if they're willing, have an appointment with them at home or at a common site where they can meet together and discuss what are the needs. Is there a food or housing trouble that the social worker can refer them to for food stamps or for housing vouchers, or whatever the family, what kind of situation the family is in and what kind of support can be provided. If there is an unemployment issue there with the family members, if they can guide them through, help them develop their resumes and stuff, all there could be several options to support the family. And so they and try to understand, like, from the perspective of the client, Alice, like how the family should what family needs to for Alice to do better, and instead of just brushing Alice, improving Alice's situation and condition. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? How about this? How about this question? Like, how would you use the tool that I introduced earlier with Alice? I love this. I enjoy hearing the silence.
Yeah, we gotta tolerate a little silence. I think that's a great question.
Here we go. Wendy's question about this is from Megan. Wendy's question about resources. Does the tool that you shared with us include the plain language explanation of trauma that Max gave? I missed seeing this image, but heard Max talking. I am thinking about a plain language one-pager for clients to understand trauma, and one-pager for mental health providers, and another one for residential community support providers to coach them in talking about the idea of trauma. This is written in plain language. The tool that I shared is written in plain language, so it's easy for most people to use.
And I think if I understood the question, maybe they were asking if there is a plain language resource to go along with it that explains trauma. If not, that's certainly something we could look at developing, right? Those are great suggestions.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope there is. I mean, it would be definitely useful, because I think plain language helps everybody in general.
So there's you're getting a lot of action now, Matt, Max, in the chat. I think somebody wants you to put the tool up again, and they had a couple more questions.
Yeah, I can show that. I'm not.
Is there somebody, Stacy, who could put that back up again for us?
Yep, we'll pull that up. Give us 1 second.
Hold on, and I'll search the.
It's also in the chat if anybody wants to download it from the chat as well.
All right. There's other things in chat that come up. And one is from Cody Hickman, and they said it would also help to provide the family resources related to supporting understanding the nuances of co-occurring needs in persons with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, including strategies for navigating whole person care and encouraging a collaborative biopsychosocial approach among her providers navigating insurance, especially with autism spectrum, when autism spectrum disorder might overshadow her other needs or vice versa, and finding community supports to assist in her overall well-being and theirs. And then Karen Topper says you could give her some choices. She could fill it out together or with you or a trusted person. Maybe this is a good way to get the conversation going with her family. Alice could share it with her family if she wants to.
So Maura, I know you asked to have this put back up again. Did you want to come off mute and have a discussion or ask some questions about it, or were you just wanting to take another glance? We have about 5 minutes left, I think, if I'm managing the time correctly. So we've certainly got time for some discussion. Okay. So I think Megan is got her hand up.
Hi, thank you so much for reposting the tool. That was very helpful to be able to see because that helped answer my question. I love this explanation of what are triggers. And so I think what I am thinking about is an explanation of what trauma is in plain language, and then accompanying materials for mental health providers who are treating trauma. And to coach them about using plain language in trauma treatment. And then I'm thinking about service providers, right? Daily support personnel or residential providers who may not be treating trauma, but who may be a person supporting someone and walking through the triggers. And so some sort of, companion for them to think about or understand trauma and how to talk about it in a plain language way, I think would be amazing.
I think that's a great suggestion and exactly the kind of feedback we're hoping to get from these. We've got several things in the chat. The tool was downloaded. Stephanie downloaded that, or put it in the chat so you can download that so you have it. Annette says the tool could also be a good educational resource to help her understand the concept of triggers, which we just talked about. Brian Sims, who talked to us earlier, makes note that there is public domain information available on the NASHPD website, and he gives the website there, and it's under the Center for Policy and Practice. It's written in plain language with references to the Guidance for Trauma-Informed Environment document. And then Regina says, one consideration that I hope to reiterate is that the concept of, quote, trauma is not always transferable from culture to culture. Such a good point. In other words, we don't all view trauma in the same way because one person views as trauma, another may view as normal. It's important to research the cultural perspectives of trauma. And I think that's a point Brian was trying to make as well. I heard him say it a couple of times, but it's you're right. It's about experience. So what's traumatic for me will not necessarily be traumatic to another person. Janine says it would be great for the whole family to identify their triggers individually and as a family to for an understanding of these individually and as a whole will help their own interactions on a daily basis. And then Megan says this is an awesome tool. Way to go, Max. And I think we can take the tool back down now if we want. So, but thank you. Great. So we still have, I think, about 2 minutes left. If there are some, if anybody's wanted to talk and hasn't had a chance, you're almost out of time. Well, but you can always text or email, and I will have some more information about that in a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So we can sit in silence for just a minute just to make sure. I don't want to end early if there's other comments. This has been great, though. I will say you all have made some really, really significant contributions, I think, and very different from the session we had earlier today with DSP. So I think it's really interesting and exciting for us to really gain all these different perspectives from people and different groups of people. That's going to really help us assure that there's information that's going to be useful to everybody when the website comes up. Max, did you have any closing comments? I think we're down to about 1 minute.
The only closing comments I have is just like, thank you all for, coming on here, taking the time to attend this training, and I hope you take this back to the good work you do.
All right. So I guess with that, Max, we are to turn over to Dr. Deb Pinos for final words. Yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. Great discussion, great input. Really appreciated what everybody said. My name is Dr. Deb Peinels. I am a clinical consultant to this NASD's and partnership project, the Link Center. And I also work for NASHBID as a senior medical and forensic advisor. And my role here is to close us up. I just want to first just say a little bit more about myself. I'm a middle-aged woman with short dark hair, wearing a brownish sweater and big square earrings, and have glasses on as well. So what I want to remind you is that this chat is really helpful for us. So please put in the chat, what are your go-to resources? You know, any trainings, websites, or places that you get information about trauma, so that we can really look at those and maybe include those, and really appreciate your input on that. Also, just to remind you, and this is also in the chat, that until the website is available, you can reach us by email at the Link Center at nasdds.org, NASDDDS.org. And the website is coming soon, so stay tuned. Also want to just give you a heads up about the upcoming shared learning groups. We finished our Supporting Someone in Crisis back in October. We're now doing these trauma shared learning groups. We have 2 more tomorrow on this very same topic of trauma, one with families to get their input and one with individuals. And we're really looking forward to hearing those perspectives as well, and then putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. In April, there will be another set of shared learning groups, so we really hope you come back. In April, the topic will be supporting someone through a transition. We know that transitions can be very challenging on so many levels, and so we're excited to hear some input around that. We're already working with partners to help develop that shared learning group. And then in August, we have another set of shared learning groups about supporting the whole person. And so please stay tuned. Please mark those dates on your calendar. Please join us again. Your input is incredibly valuable. The slide set has these resources. If you're interested in seeing more, these are some of the references that were used. And big shout out to Perry, Max, and all of the partners at the Link Center for contributing to the preparation and content of this meeting. Really looking forward to digesting the chat. Please remember to scan this QR code if you can take a moment to do that, and then fill out the survey to tell us what your thoughts are about this. This will really help us because we use your input very closely to help improve all of our future sessions and everything we're developing. This is really a collaborative effort, and without your input, we can't do as well. So please take a moment to put your camera on from your phone on this QR code and click on the link to fill out the survey. And I think with that, that's the final word.